Cade Salvage Yard, Norfolk. Tuesday, just past noon. Vivian Castellan crossed the gravel in heels and a red blazer, flanked by Priya Voss, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Mayor's office, and 2 Castellan engineers. Weston Cade climbed down from the crane in oil-stained coveralls and didn't remove his gloves. Vivian glanced at Voss, then at him. "Go back to your scrapyard, Mr. Cade." She turned and walked off, heels grinding rust. Weston climbed back up. On Hampton Boulevard, a black Navy staff car slowed at the gate. It didn't stop. Not yet. The yard quieted at 4. The crane went silent. The afternoon shift drove out in primer-patched pickups. Weston stayed to finish the Tuesday inventory himself, marking each pulled section with a small, clean check, the way he did every week. He'd been told 3 hours earlier to go back to his scrapyard. He hadn't answered. He'd simply returned to the crane and finished the lift. The words hadn't made him slower or faster than he already was. At 4:30 he locked the gate and drove north to Willoughby Elementary. Sable came out with her backpack bouncing and a folded drawing in her fist. "Miss Doyle read us a book about brown pelicans," she said, climbing into the cab. "They dive. They eat. They don't waste anything. That sounds like a useful bird." She unfolded the drawing on her knees, a pelican with a beak as long as its body. "Daddy, what's a scrapyard?" He looked at her. "A place where things that broke get a second life. That's a good place." It can be. They stopped at the yard so he could sign a delivery slip. Sable wandered the fence line and found a piece of brass in the dust, which she pocketed. She never noticed the white business card lying on the cinder block step by the office door. Weston did. He picked it up and slid it into his shirt pocket without comment. At home in Willoughby Bay, he heated a casserole his uncle had left him. Emmett Cade came by at 6 with a bag of tomatoes from his own porch. Emmett was 71, and the cancer in his lungs had taken most of his weight, but he still came every Tuesday. He believed a girl Sable's age needed a third chair at the table. "How'd the day go?" "That bad. A woman came to look at the yard. She didn't like what she saw." Emmett chewed slowly. "People don't usually like what they don't understand, son." "You know that better than most." Weston said nothing. He cut another piece of casserole for Sable. She told Emmett all about the pelicans. After dinner, Sable brushed her teeth and asked for the pelican book. Weston read her 2 pages. She was asleep by the 3rd. He stood in the doorway a moment, looking at her in the half-dark, the drawing propped on the knitstand beneath a stone she'd found on the spit a year before. Back in the kitchen, Emmett stood at the door in his coat. Neither said good night. He just tapped the doorframe twice on his way out, an old habit from the yard. Weston listened to the truck pull away, washed the dishes, turned off the porch light, and sat a long while at the kitchen table with his hands folded, listening to the dishes settle, the clock tick, his daughter's breathing through the wall. He set the business card down. Castellan Maritime Solutions. Vivian Castellan, Chief Executive Officer. He looked at it once, turned it face down, and went to bed at 10 without checking his phone. Vivian drove south on Hampton Boulevard at 8:55 Wednesday morning with a folder on the passenger seat. Her father had taught her long ago that if you turn a man down, you do it to his face, and she meant to deliver the formal audit in person. She hadn't slept. She parked beside Weston's truck. He was at the south fence marking sections in white chalk, and didn't look surprised to see her. "Mr. Cade, I came to deliver the formal audit in person. Castellan Maritime won't be moving forward. I felt you deserved a face, not an email." He took the folder, set it on the hood without opening it. "Thank you, Miss Castellan." That was all. She'd expected anger. She hadn't expected the plain acceptance of a man who'd carried worse news than hers for far longer than she'd been a CEO. At 9:07, a black Navy staff car turned in and stopped on the gravel. Vice Admiral Thaddeus Marlowe stepped out in service dress khaki, 3 stars on each shoulder, Senior Chief Darrell Renshaw behind him. Marlowe crossed the yard without a glance at Vivian and stopped 3 steps from Weston. "Captain Kidd, it's been 4 years." The crane kept running. A gull cried over the river. Weston peeled off his gloves finger by finger, laid them on the hull section, and didn't salute. He stood the way a man stands when he's no longer required to sit. The word captain hung in the air. Vivian didn't yet know what to do with it. Marlowe spoke loud enough for her to hear. "I came to ask you to do a job. The Navy's preparing the sensitive system recovery on USS Halpern in Philadelphia. We need 3 civilian salvage partners with secret clearance and hull integrity experience. Yours is one of 3 yards on the East Coast that qualify. I wanted to ask you in person. Weston listened without moving. Marlowe turned to Vivian. Miss Castellan, Captain Kidd pulled your father out of 55-knot winds off Nantucket in 2014. He was a lieutenant then, held the con of a destroyer through seas that should have broken her. 12 people came home. Your father was one of them. Vivian said nothing. In her head, yesterday's words replayed in her own voice. Go back to your scrapyard, Mr. Cade. Weston turned back to Marlowe. Sir, I appreciate the visit. I'm not coming back, Marlowe nodded, unargumentative, and set a card on the truck's hood beside the folder. My door is open, Captain. It always will be. He walked back to the car. Before climbing in, Renshaw paused beside Vivian. Ma'am, what he carries he doesn't tell people. Don't ask him about his wife. The car rolled south. Vivian stood on the gravel, unmoving. She hadn't known he was a captain. She hadn't known he'd saved her father's life. She hadn't known about a wife. Across the yard, Weston pulled his gloves back on and returned to the hull. He didn't look at her or at the card. He worked because that was what a Wednesday at 9:07 called for. At 9:42 she called her father from a gas station lot, not trusting her voice indoors. Tell me about Nantucket. Desmond Castellan was quiet, then began. March 2014. The Atlantic tender lost main propulsion in a nor'easter, drifting toward rocks, taking water through a cracked weld. We sent a mayday. The nearest Navy asset was the destroyer Hawthorne. Captain Kidd, a lieutenant then, had the con. He drove that ship into 55-knot winds that should have broken her and held her bow to the wind for 40 minutes while his crew put a line on us. A chief told me later it was the finest ship handling he'd seen in 26 years at sea. 12 men came home. I'm one of them. I wouldn't be alive to build Castellan Maritime if he'd stayed in the harbor that night. Margot, you owe him an apology. Not on paper. In person, with coffee in your hand and your head where it belongs. She drove to the base commissary where her father had bought coffee for 30 years. The clerk recognized her card and brought down a tin, navy blue label, the blend her father had carried home for decades. At 3:15 she returned to the yard, unannounced, filled a thermos, and set it on the hood of Weston's truck. My father said you'd remember the brand. He studied it a long moment, then poured 2 cups and handed her one. They sat together on the cinderblock step. Emmett passed by, saw Vivian, and nodded once. The first time she'd been acknowledged by a man in that yard. Sable came out with a stone crab cupped in her hands and knelt beside Vivian to show it off. Are you the lady from yesterday? Yes. Daddy didn't say anything bad about you. Vivian didn't know what to say to that. Sable returned the crab to its hiding spot and went back inside. That evening, Corbin Ashcroft called Vivian's cell. She let it go to voicemail. He invited Castellan Maritime to join a project he called the Elizabeth Riverside Renaissance and said he'd send the prospectus. It arrived at midnight. She opened it at her counter, and her glass slipped a quarter inch when she saw the center of the map. Cod Salvage Yard, the full 8-acre parcel, marked for rezoning as the anchor, lot of a $42 million mixed-use development. She didn't sleep. By morning she had a list. She called Priya Voss at 7:20. I need every land transfer in Hampton Roads for the last 36 months, cross-referenced against Ashcroft Waterfront Holdings and any LLCs sharing registered agents. That isn't standard. You saw what I did Tuesday. I'm trying to undo it. Help me. A pause. One favor. Use it well. The records came by encrypted email that afternoon. Vivian worked past midnight with a yellow highlighter, tracing red lines between shell companies and a single registered agent, a strip mall office in Virginia Beach that had filed 382 LLCs in 6 years, all in the same handwriting. Ashcroft Waterfront Holdings had quietly acquired 14 contiguous parcels along the Elizabeth River through 4 shells: Tidewater Real Holdings, Harborview Group, East Norfolk Properties, Atlantic Coast Renewal, all sharing that agent. 13 of the 14 lots were assembled. The keystone, without which there was no waterfront access for the condos, was Cade Salvage Yard. Estimated value after rezoning, $42 million. She drove out the next morning with the maps instead of coffee, spreading them across the hood the way she'd spread the prospectus at home. Weston studied them and nodded slowly. Ashcroft's been trying to take this yard since 2022. He just never said why. Why does he want it? Old story. Told it once. Won't tell it twice. Sable came out with a white scallop shell and handed it to Vivian without a word. She pocketed it, not knowing what else to do. That afternoon, Renshaw brought a foil-covered dish for Emmett from his wife Colleen, and on his way out caught Weston at the gravel's edge. "Sir, there's something in my apartment safe you need to know is still there. I told you to burn it. With respect, sir, I didn't, and I never will." He drove off. Weston watched the dust settle and said nothing. That night, Vivian set the scallop shell beside her maps and studied it a long while before bed. She didn't fully know what she was doing. She only knew she'd begun it. Castellan Maritime and Cade Salvage signed a memorandum 8 days after Vivian first told Weston to go back to his scrapyard. The fourth page held a clause she'd written herself. In the event of any third-party rezoning or eminent domain action against the parcel, Castellan Maritime would provide pro bono legal defense, without limit of time or expense, until resolved. Weston read it twice. "My daughter's name doesn't appear anywhere, not in trust, not in any filing." "It doesn't." He signed. That Sunday, Sable asked Vivian to walk with her out to Willoughby Spit. Weston watched from the truck as they went down to the water, boots in Vivian's hand, Sable barefoot. "Do you like brown pelicans?" "I've never really looked at one." "Daddy says they're better than seagulls. Quieter." Vivian laughed before she could stop herself. Sable took her hand, sandy, cool fingers, and they walked the rack line until she pried a horseshoe crab shell from the sea grape, holding it to the sun to show the joints. A line of pelicans crossed low over the channel, single file. Sable counted 7. Weston stood at the truck, one hand on the bed rail, and something in the set of his shoulders eased, a change only a man who'd held it tight for 4 years would notice. He noticed. That night, after Sable was asleep, Weston sat on the back step looking at the base lights across the water, hands folded, saying nothing. At 10:30, Vivian's phone rang. Colleen Renshaw, calling carefully on her own line. "Ma'am, Senior Chief Renshaw here. If you want to know why Ashcroft wants that yard so badly, read the 2021 Cade audit. It's classified. I've got the unredacted logs in my apartment safe. Cure Coffee on Granby Street, tomorrow 0700. Bring an envelope. Don't tell the captain." Vivian agreed, then sat a long while thinking of the scallop shell, and of Weston's hand on the bed rail, watching his daughter wade into the surf beside a woman who wasn't her mother, and wasn't yet anything else. By sunrise, she'd know what Corbin Ashcroft really wanted, and it was never the land. Cure Coffee opened at 7. Renshaw was already at a corner table with a craft envelope. "Read it here. Don't take it out of the building." Inside were photocopied helicopter maintenance logs from a Navy squadron dated through 2021, and a classified report titled Atlantic Fleet MH-60 Maintenance Subcontractor Review, dated December 2021, lead investigator Commander Weston Cade. It concluded that Ashcroft Maritime Logistics had falsified 11 maintenance log entries across 7 helicopters between 2019 and 2021, including tail number 167,840, which went down off the Virginia Capes in November 2021, killing 5 crew. The crash itself had been investigated separately. Commander Cade had been recused for personal involvement. Among the 5 names listed alphabetically was Lieutenant Commander Josephine Cade Nurse Corps. Vivian read the name twice. Josephine had been a flight nurse, the kind of woman who flew toward the broken to keep them alive. Her hand didn't shake. Something behind her ribs did. "He did the broader audit, ma'am," Renshaw said. "Not the crash, he couldn't touch that. But he could touch the contractors, so that's what he chose." Signed off classified by Rear Admiral Marlowe that December. Ashcroft Maritime was debarred in January 22. Merrick Ashcroft took his own life that March. Vivian drove straight to the yard and held out the envelope. Renshaw kept these. Weston looked at the first page, then set it down, unfinished. "I told him to burn it. Why didn't you fight to publish it?" Josephine wasn't coming back either way. Sable was 4. She needed a father, not a man stuck in hearings. The next words left Vivian before she planned them. "There's a public hearing on your parcel in 8 days. When did you find out?" 52 days ago. "You didn't tell me. I told you the day we met. I chose not to fight. You're going to fight now." "And so am I." He looked at her, at the envelope, back at her, said neither yes nor no, and locked it in his desk drawer. She called Priya Voss from the car. "I need every Ashcroft filing before Friday. We're going to council." The Norfolk City Council chamber was full the night of July 2nd. reporters and a camera crew in place. Priya Voss stood at the back, unannounced. Weston sat beside Vivian in a plain shirt, no uniform. Corbin Ashcroft, having formally recused himself from the vote, spoke first as a private citizen, of blight, of environmental hazard, of a $42 million revitalization for working families. He never looked at Weston. When he said blight, Vivian rose. She introduced herself as CEO of Castellan Maritime, an active Navy contracting partner, and made 3 points. The yard held rare dual certifications, making it a strategic asset, not blight. A schematic showed Ashcroft Waterfront Holdings 14 parcels, assembled through 4 shells sharing 1 registered agent, suggesting a conflict of interest involving a council member who'd only recused on paper. And she moved to postpone the vote pending an ethics inquiry. Ashcroft leaned to his microphone. Miss Castellan defends a scrapyard owner. Why? In the silence that followed, a man in a civilian suit rose in the back. Vice Admiral Thaddeus Marlowe, Vice Commander, U.S. Fleet Forces Command. Ashcroft lost his rhythm. Weston stood, both hands braced on the bench. My wife flew helicopters into weather that would have grounded most pilots. She didn't die because she was unlucky. She died because someone falsified a logbook. I wrote the audit that proved it. The Navy classified it. I chose, at the time, not to fight that. I'm choosing differently tonight. He turned to Ashcroft. Your brother made decisions that killed 7 crew families. Mine was one of them. I didn't testify for revenge. I testified because the next family deserved better. I don't enjoy standing here. I'm standing because the next family always deserves better. His voice dropped, unbroken. My daughter still keeps a feather in her pocket because her mother told her the sky remembers people. The sky shouldn't have had to remember Josephine. It should have brought her home. The chamber went silent. The council postponed the rezoning indefinitely and opened an ethics inquiry. The story ran above the fold that Sunday. By Tuesday, Ashcroft had resigned his council seat, citing family reasons. The next morning, the yard sat wet with fog. Vivian arrived at 6:30, unsure what she'd come for, and came anyway. Weston poured her coffee without a word. Sable came in with a white gull feather. Daddy says these mean luck. Mama said they mean the sky remembers you. She held it up until Vivian took it. Emmett, watching from his folding chair with his oxygen tube looped over one ear, nodded slowly. It was the first time in 2 years Sable had said, Mama, out loud. Vivian tucked the feather into her coat, not trusting herself to put it anywhere else. That afternoon, Marlowe called. Captain, I'm offering you a civilian advisor position with Eastern Surface Operations Recovery. No uniform, no deployment. Weston listened. And Captain, I signed off on classifying your audit in 2021. I told myself it was to protect active programs. I was protecting my own decision-making. I was wrong. I'm not asking because the Navy needs you. I'm asking because I owe you the chance to come back on your terms. I'll think about it, not for the Navy, for Renshaw. He kept the file when I told him to burn it. That afternoon, Emmett was admitted to the hospital, 2 to 3 weeks, the doctor said. Vivian visited that night, bringing soup from a diner Emmett had liked as a young man. He told her, in a thin voice, that her father had served on the same waterfront decades ago, and that the world had a way of folding back into the same shape twice if you waited long enough. Weston accepted the advisor position on the 1st of August, kept the yard, and split his week between fleet forces and coveralls. Castellan Maritime and Cade Salvage signed their full USS Halpern partnership agreement the same day, 31 pages, plus a writer Vivian had written first in pencil, then ink. The Sable Josephine Cade Educational Trust, 4% of net annual profit in perpetuity, split between an educational fund for Sable and scholarships for children of Norfolk Naval Station personnel. It was the first legal filing in 4 years to use Sable's full middle name. Weston set the pen down for nearly a minute. Josephine would have signed this herself. Then he signed. Emmett died 12 days later, a quiet Sunday morning. The funeral at St. Mary's was small and full. Renshaw and Colleen sat with Nora in the third pew. Priya Voss stood at the back. Marlowe didn't come, but sent a letter Weston read alone and showed no one. Desmond Castellan came down for the service, and afterward in the parking lot, shook Weston's hand. Captain, sir, that was enough. Emmett's will left the yard entirely to Weston, the office, the cranes, the 8 acres, and the framed photo of his father on a tugboat deck in 1978. The following Friday, The Renshaws came to dinner. Colleen brought a casserole. Nora brought cards and a stuffed dog. Vivian brought nothing. She'd been invited, not summoned. Sable fell asleep on the sofa with the feather in her hand. Colleen hugged Vivian at the door 2 seconds longer than a stranger would. Vivian stayed to wash dishes. Weston dried. They didn't talk much, moving through the stack in an unpracticed rhythm neither needed to think about. When the last plate was done, she set the gull feather on the windowsill above the sink. It dried there in the steam. It wasn't a declaration. It was just the kitchen. 6 weeks later, in September, with salt riding the wind inland and the dogwoods reddening at their tips, Vivian drove to the yard in sneakers instead of boots and walked through the gate without calling ahead. She no longer needed to. Weston stood at the dock, teaching Sable a bowline knot. Rabbit comes out of the hole, around the tree, back down the hole. She fumbled it, then got it right, prouder than Vivian had ever seen a child look. He looked up, saw Vivian, and simply held out his hand. The three of them walked to the end of the dock at low tide, the river running gold and quiet. Sable ran ahead hunting shells. Weston, eyes on the water, said, "You once told me to go back to my scrapyard." "I did. And I came with you." He let the silence sit, the kind with room in it, then reached over and brushed the back of her hand with his. Just that, the smallest consent. Down at the mudline, Sable held up a clamshell as long as her forearm and shouted something neither of them quite caught. That same afternoon, an unmarked envelope reached Vice Admiral Marlowe's outer office. Inside was a single photograph: Weston, Sable, and Vivian at the end of the dock, the river behind them. Marlowe studied it a long minute, then set it beside an older photo on his desk. Commander Weston Cade at a commissioning ceremony in 2018. He looked at the two pictures together, didn't salute, only bowed his head once, and went back to work. He had gone back to his scrapyard. She had been the one who came with him. And for the first time since the sky took Josephine, the silence in the yard was no longer. Thank you for listening this story. Please like and subscribe and let us know in comments which country you are watching from.